Sirens scream through the Los Angeles night. Streets glow red and blue as convoys of ICE vehicles block entire neighborhoods. Children cry behind shattered blinds. Cameras roll. America watches. What happens when a city declares war on its own government? The declaration of a state of emergency in Los Angeles County has shattered decades of political convention. On October 14, 2025, the Board of Supervisors invoked emergency powers once reserved for earthquakes and wildfires, not immigration raids. Supervisor Lindsay Horvath's voice trembled as she spoke. Families are being torn apart, businesses are closing, and fear is spreading like wildfire. The vote passed 4-1, making Los Angeles the first major U.S. county to formally defy the Trump administration's immigration crackdown. By dawn, ICE tactical teams had already swept through East LA, Van Nuys, and Compton, arresting hundreds. Local police stood by helplessly, caught between state orders and federal command. Factories went silent, schools half empty, hospitals flooded with terrified families reporting panic attacks and missing relatives. From the White House, President Donald Trump issued a terse statement through DHS. No jurisdiction will be allowed to harbor illegals. Federal law will be enforced by any means necessary. His tone echoed his 2025 re-election pledge: restore the rule of law and end sanctuary chaos. Strategically, Los Angeles has become more than just a city. It's a symbol, the largest sanctuary stronghold in America. To Washington, it represents resistance. To millions of immigrants, it's the last refuge. According to Reuters, federal agencies have quietly reclassified non-compliant localities as potential domestic obstruction zones. That bureaucratic term may soon define a constitutional crisis. Across the Atlantic, European media drew sharp parallels. BBC analysts compared LA's standoff to Poland's defiance of EU migrant policies, governments wrestling for control over borders and sovereignty. DW framed it as a domestic Cold War, warning that if states begin to pick and choose which federal laws to obey, America risks fragmenting into rival systems of justice. Meanwhile, on the global stage, the echoes are unmistakable. In Ukraine, cities torn between Russian control and Kyiv's command mirror this same struggle for legitimacy. In Iran and Israel, local militias challenge national authority. In the South China Sea, Beijing's shadow governance in disputed waters shows what happens when power is divided and blurred. At the heart of it all lies a single haunting question. Can a nation remain united when its own cities rebel in the name of humanity? And if Los Angeles, the beating heart of California's culture and economy, can defy Washington this openly, what comes next? A movement? A crackdown? Or the beginning of a new kind of American civil conflict, one fought not with weapons but with warrants. Dawn breaks over a city divided. Outside MacArthur Park, thousands gather, holding banners, shouting into megaphones, their chants colliding with the whir of helicopters above. "No ICE in our neighborhoods," they cry, as officers in riot gear stand shoulder to shoulder, faces blank behind shields. Los Angeles has seen riots, earthquakes, and fires before, but this is different. It is a clash between law and loyalty, between federal power and local conscience. Inside the County Hall of Administration, tension cuts through the air. Supervisor Janice Hahn describes the scene as fear, pain, and disorder. Children are refusing to attend school. Restaurants close early. Employers whisper warnings, "Don't open the door." Hospitals, according to a Guardian report, are filling with stress-related cases. Psychologists call it collective trauma on a civic scale. On one side stands the Trump administration, armed with the Immigration and Nationality Act and a renewed mandate to enforce it. On the other, California's leadership, invoking the moral duty to protect its residents, even those without papers. It's a battle that has reignited one of America's oldest constitutional questions. Who truly holds the power? The federal government or the states? Political shockwaves reach Sacramento. Governor Gavin Newsom, already clashing with Washington over environmental policy and trade tariffs, calls LA's move a moral stand. But in Washington, Homeland Security warns of legal consequences for any official obstructing federal operations. Behind closed doors, Justice Department lawyers discuss invoking the Insurrection Act, a law once used to deploy federal troops in the South during the Civil Rights era. For millions of Californians, that phrase sends chills down their spine. The divide deepens. Conservative networks praise ICE's resolve, calling the emergency declaration reckless and an abuse of local power. Progressive outlets label the raids a war on families. According to BBC World News, foreign diplomats in Washington are watching closely, concerned that America's internal fracture may weaken its global credibility. Analysts warn that the crisis could soon spill into the financial sector. Defense News notes that supply routes tied to military contractors in Southern California, including aerospace hubs in El Segundo and Palmdale, are facing worker shortages due to fear-driven absenteeism. Economic instability, once confined to the border, now reaches the industrial heart of the West Coast. Meanwhile, social media burns with fury. Footage of mothers dragged from construction sites trends under the hashtag #HandsOffLA. Counter hashtags like #Law and Order USA surge just as fast. In one viral clip, an ICE officer is surrounded by protesters screaming for him to leave their neighborhood. His voice trembles as he shouts back, "I'm just following orders," a phrase that history remembers all too well. The emotional cost is undeniable. Fear seeps into every street. Neighbors stop talking. Church groups hide families in basements. The line between community protection and criminal concealment grows dangerously thin. What began as a law enforcement operation is now a moral battlefield. And as California stands defiant, one question burns through the smog. Is America still one nation, or has it quietly become two? By week's end, the conflict has erupted beyond California's borders. Washington strikes back. At the White House press briefing, ICE spokesperson Emily Convington slams Los Angeles County's emergency declaration as pure political theater. Her words cut sharp across national television. The only true emergency is the one residents face after electing leaders who give a middle finger to the law. Behind her, a DHS banner glows in blue, a symbol of federal order reclaiming its ground. President Donald Trump, returning from a security meeting with military advisors, doubles down. "We will not allow rogue states to undermine federal authority," he declares. The tone is unmistakable, the same defiant resolve he once used in his trade wars with China. Within hours, the Justice Department announces an investigation into whether Los Angeles officials violated Title VIII of the U.S. Code, which makes harboring undocumented individuals a federal offense. The move sends shockwaves through local governments nationwide. Reuters reports that several mayors from Chicago, Seattle, and New York, themselves leaders of sanctuary cities, hold an emergency video conference to discuss coordinated resistance. Yet behind the defiance lies fear. Federal funding for police departments, hospitals, and housing projects is suddenly at stake. In Congress, the divide hardens. Republican senators hail the crackdown as a restoration of national unity. Democratic lawmakers warn that using law enforcement as a political weapon risks tearing the country apart. But the White House remains unmoved. Inside DHS command centers, intelligence officers monitor local protests in real time, labeling some high-risk gatherings. Drones circle above downtown LA, their silent hum a reminder that surveillance has become America's new frontier. The BBC compares the situation to Hungary's 2015 migrant crisis, when national and local governments clashed over EU enforcement orders. The Guardian frames it more starkly. The US now faces its own version of Brexit, not from Europe, but from itself. On the ground, tension boils. In Southgate, an ICE convoy faces a blockade of human chains. Clergy, teachers, and factory workers standing arm in arm. If they come for one of us, they come for all, shouts a local pastor. Federal officers push forward. Pepper spray clouds the air. Television cameras capture the chaos. But amid the fury, a darker current rises, one that intelligence analysts from Jane's Defense Weekly describe as incipient domestic radicalization. Encrypted messages spread online, urging armed defense of immigrant neighborhoods. Others call for sabotage against ICE vehicles. The FBI moves quickly to flag extremist chatter from both sides, pro-immigrant militias and far-right groups, warning that the situation could spiral into violence. And yet, the moral debate remains unresolved. To some Americans, these raids represent justice, the reassertion of borders, sovereignty, and order. To others, they mark the erosion of the Republic's founding values, compassion, liberty, and refuge. As dusk falls over Los Angeles, the skyline flickers. Drone lights above, candlelight vigils below. Two visions of America stare each other down. How far will Washington go to enforce control? And when enforcement becomes confrontation, who will decide where the line of freedom truly lies? The streets of Los Angeles no longer belong to one side. They belong to chaos. Protesters march by the thousands. Police form barricades across Wilshire Boulevard. From Koreatown to Boyle Heights, neighborhoods once defined by diversity now brace for confrontation. And then comes the leak. A single video that ignites an inferno. The footage, posted anonymously online, shows Cynthia Gonzalez, the vice mayor of Cudahy, allegedly telling local gang members to defend their territory from ICE officers. Within hours, the clip floods social media, drawing millions of views and furious debate. Was it a call to arms or a desperate plea for protection? Federal investigators don't wait to find out. The FBI opens an inquiry into possible incitement to violence. Across the nation, headlines explode. Al Jazeera calls it the first sign of urban resistance against federal power. Reuters reports that DHS has quietly activated Operation Sentinel, a multi-agency initiative to monitor and neutralize local threats against ICE. What began as an immigration dispute now looks more like a counterinsurgency campaign. Inside Los Angeles, fear takes a new form. In East LA, anonymous flyers appear on street poles warning federal eyes are watching. Residents whisper about unmarked SUVs parked near schools. Civil rights groups demand oversight, accusing Washington of turning the city into a surveillance zone. Yet beneath the surface, a network of solidarity grows stronger. Church basements transform into makeshift shelters. Legal aid clinics stay open past midnight. Activists coordinate safe houses for families at risk of deportation. The Guardian reports that over 70% of undocumented immigrants in LA County have stopped using public services, fearing their data might be shared with ICE. It's an invisible exodus, not across borders, but into silence. Meanwhile, global reactions intensify. DW in Germany compares LA's unrest to the migrant standoffs in Lampedusa and Lesbos, where humanitarian ideals collided with border enforcement. European analysts warn that America's internal fractures mirror the global trend, nations hardening their borders while societies fight to keep their humanity intact. In Washington, Trump's advisors meet in closed rooms. Defense News confirms the DHS has requested National Guard standby authority, a move signaling the administration's readiness to deploy federal forces if local law enforcement fails to maintain order. For the first time since the 1960s civil unrest, Los Angeles faces the specter of military involvement. And through it all, the moral divide deepens. Supporters of the administration argue that sovereignty must prevail, that without borders, there is no nation. Opponents counter that justice without mercy becomes tyranny. Somewhere in the city, a mother hides her children beneath a blanket as sirens pass. Somewhere else, an officer kneels, exhausted, unsure if the uniform still means protection or fear. As the lights of Los Angeles flicker under the weight of surveillance drones, one truth becomes clear. This is no longer about immigration. It's about who controls the narrative of America's future: the government, the people, or the chaos in between. When local leaders stand against federal law in the name of morality, is that courage or the first act of rebellion? At the center of the storm stands the Oval Office. President Donald Trump, visibly defiant, convenes his national security team under the banner of Operation Uphold the Law. The meeting, confirmed by Reuters and Defense News, marks a decisive shift from enforcement to escalation.
"We're not negotiating with lawbreakers," Trump declares. "We're restoring the rule of law, period."
Behind him, Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf Jr., ICE Director David Marin, and Attorney General John Ratcliffe outline the next steps. Legal scholars call it the most aggressive federal maneuver against a state government since the 1957 integration crisis in Little Rock. Federal prosecutors are instructed to pursue criminal charges against any local official knowingly obstructing immigration operations. Los Angeles is placed under enhanced federal jurisdiction, granting ICE agents broader arrest authority and access to state detention facilities. But this is not just legal warfare, it's strategic theater. Trump's administration understands the optics. BBC World Service reports that the White House has framed Los Angeles as the front line in the battle for America's identity. To supporters, it's a stand for sovereignty. To critics, a dangerous flirtation with authoritarianism. Meanwhile, DHS intelligence briefs warn of incipient violent resistance from radicalized groups. Federal surveillance identifies online calls for neighborhood defense patrols and civil disobedience networks. Jane's Defense Weekly notes an unusual pattern. ICE operations now deploy military-grade reconnaissance drones, technology once reserved for overseas missions in Syria and Iraq, to monitor large gatherings in urban areas. Across Europe and Asia, the implications are studied closely. In Kyiv, Ukrainian strategists compare the standoff to Russia's hybrid warfare tactics, blending legal control, propaganda, and localized intimidation. In Tehran, state media mocks America's fractured democracy, calling it proof that the empire is collapsing from within. In Beijing, China's state-run Global Times publishes a blistering editorial. America lectures the world on law and order, but cannot control its own streets. The symbolism isn't lost on Washington's allies. DW reports not diplomats privately expressing concern that the domestic turmoil could undermine U.S. credibility in global defense commitments, especially as American forces continue coordinating joint operations in Eastern Europe. The image of a divided America, they warn, emboldens adversaries. At home, the tension crackles. The White House authorizes the temporary deployment of federal marshals to protect government facilities in Los Angeles. Military analysts note that this mirrors the same tactics used during protests in Portland years earlier, a precedent that blurred the lines between policing and military action. But every escalation invites its own backlash. Thousands rally outside City Hall chanting, "You can't deport a movement." Police clash with demonstrators. Drones record every frame. The balance between security and freedom teeters dangerously. Is this the price of law and order, or the slow normalization of martial power in civilian life? As the sun sets over the Pacific, the White House issues a final warning. If state officials continue to interfere, federal control may expand beyond Los Angeles into any jurisdiction, undermining immigration enforcement. America watches. The world judges. And somewhere in the background, a question echoes louder than the sirens. In the pursuit of order, how much freedom is too much to lose? Night falls over Los Angeles. Helicopters hover like silent predators above the skyline, their spotlights slicing through the smog. In the distance, the Pacific glows faintly, indifferent to the city's unrest. On the ground, however, the tension feels biblical. Families hide behind locked doors. Protesters clash with federal agents outside Union Station. Cameras capture it all, broadcasting America's division to the world. This is no longer about policy. It's about identity, the kind that defines empires. The Los Angeles crisis has become a mirror for the entire United States. Sanctuary cities in Chicago, Seattle, and New York are preparing for similar confrontations. Governors form legal coalitions to resist Washington's reach. Yet, as Reuters notes, federal courts have begun siding with the Trump administration, affirming that immigration remains a national jurisdiction. The message is clear. States may question, but they cannot disobey. In the Oval Office, President Trump calls the situation a test of America's resolve. His team describes LA's resistance as domestic insubordination. Behind the rhetoric lies a deeper strategy to reassert federal supremacy, redefine state compliance, and project unwavering power both at home and abroad. BBC analysts call it a calculated performance of authority, a signal to global rivals that the United States remains capable of enforcing discipline within its own borders. Yet, the optics abroad tell a different story. DW highlights how Moscow and Beijing are exploiting the turmoil in their state media, framing the US as a divided superpower consumed by internal strife. Al Jazeera adds that America's moral credibility, once tied to ideals of freedom and justice, now faces erosion as images of armored ICE vehicles rolling through American neighborhoods circulate online. The irony is painful. In Ukraine, freedom is defended with weapons. In Iran, dissent is silenced through fear. In China, control is absolute. And now, in America, the nation that once claimed to embody liberty, the boundaries between enforcement and oppression blur with each siren that wails through Los Angeles. But beyond the politics lies the human cost. A father separated from his children at a bus depot. A teacher dismissed for sheltering her undocumented students. A paramedic detained for refusing to disclose a patient's immigration status. Their stories barely reach the headlines, drowned out by the noise of ideological warfare. Sociologists warn of a psychological fracture spreading through immigrant communities, a sense that trust in American institutions has been irrevocably broken. Churches that once preached unity now whisper about survival. Lawyers speak of constitutional fatigue. Even local police officers question their oath, torn between enforcing law and preserving humanity. And yet, amid the despair, resilience endures. Volunteers deliver food to hiding families. Students film testimonies for history. In the heart of downtown, a mural appears overnight. Two hands, one in uniform, one in chains, reaching for each other across a wall of fire. Beneath it, a single word: America. The image goes viral. It becomes the question of a generation. Can a nation built on freedom survive when fear becomes its foundation? And if Los Angeles, the beating heart of the West Coast, falls into silence, what echoes will remain for the rest of the world to hear? The Los Angeles immigration crisis of October 2025 marks one of the most explosive domestic confrontations in modern U.S. history. Triggered by mass ICE raids and Los Angeles County's unprecedented declaration of a local state of emergency, the conflict exposes the fragile line between law enforcement and civil rights. As President Donald Trump's administration reasserts federal control, local leaders accuse Washington of weaponizing policy to instill fear. The crisis becomes both a constitutional showdown and a moral reckoning, echoing across America's political and social landscape. Internationally, the standoff reverberates as a warning of democratic fragility. Allies question U.S. stability while adversaries exploit its turmoil. Yet beneath the politics lie millions of silent stories, families torn apart, neighbors divided, and a nation questioning its own reflection. In the end, Los Angeles stands not just as a city under siege, but as a symbol of a nation confronted